Good morning. I'm so excited to be with you all. My name is Emily Nguyen, and I am the Deputy Director at the Weitz Family Foundation. I've actually been with the Weitz Family Foundation here just a little over 2 months. So I am the newest staff member. Part of my role at the foundation is really to help support the team in all of their grant making, which if you are a current applicant or a grantee of the organization, you know that that is our prime time right now. So the team is currently in process of reviewing about 245 grant applications. So if you're trying to connect with us or even want to connect with me after the session, more than happy to. I just might say wait until the end of October or beginning of November to reach out and schedule some time to connect. And I love being involved in philanthropy. Prior to actually being at the Weitz Family Foundation, I was with the Omaha Community Foundation for 7.5 years, doing research, evaluation, and also working with the grants team as well. So that's a little bit about me. Oh, and I am a Creighton and UNO alum in the MSW and PA program at UNO. So very excited to be involved with UNO as well. So I actually want to hear from you all today. I was telling Jody as I was preparing for this session, I was like, I don't know what to say. I want to actually sit and chat with all of you about what you're facing as you think about data and talking to funders or submitting grant applications. And I have some information and some feedback to share, but I really want to get to know you all. So I'm going to ask, and I'll stop sharing my screen here in just a moment, but going to ask if we could just go around the room, just popcorn style. So I'll choose someone and then you just choose the next person and do introductions. So just want to know your name and the organization that you're working with. And then why did you come to this breakout session? And I will say, I didn't want to go to any of the other ones. It's totally okay. Like this was my last resort. It's perfectly okay for a response. But if you have a specific reason, would love to know that. And then if there's one or two things that you want to get out of this session that you want to take away from, I really want to make sure that this session is useful for you all and interesting for you all. So I want to have some time to sort of make sure that we're talking about the content and having the discussion that you all want to have. So with that, I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen and we're going to do just those quick introductions. So I'm going to turn it, the first person I see actually is Mary.
Hello, I'm Mary Hubble. I'm a senior grant writer and development consultant with Vic Gutman and Associates. We are a consulting company and we work with about 20 nonprofits. We have a team of 7 grant writers and we submit a lot of grants to foundations. That's why I'm here, because that's our bread and butter. And lastly, what I'd like to take away is tips and tricks. Also, I've run into some issues with presenting data, race versus ethnicity, some other data that we're being asked more frequently from foundations that some folks find a little bit invasive and maybe don't want to reveal. I know it's well-intentioned, the request for it, and just want to see how other folks are handling it and what you recommend. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And also encourage you all. I appreciate you saying that. And also hope that today's a discussion where you share with each other as well too. I don't have all the answers to everything. And I know there are folks in this room who may have things that they're doing that are working. So just ask that if you hear about something and you're like, oh, I've tried that, please jump in as we talk today and share that insight. We'll have time at the end to do that as well. Thank you.
And I will hand it off to Grant.
Hi, everybody. My name is Grant Daly, and I work at the Nebraska Association of Local Health Directors as a community health planner and data specialist. One of the reasons I wanted to be part of this session is there's actually a lot of local health departments that have relationships with local foundations. Some do, some don't. And that's kind of, especially in more rural areas, that's potentially something that may be missing for to support their work. So just kind of interested in growing those relationships, how they can do, they can learn from this and be involved in and forming those connections and better presenting information. So just, I don't know if I really explained, the Nebraska Association of Local Health Directors is an organization that is a nonprofit organization, but works on behalf of the state's local health departments.
Awesome, thank you. You want to pass it to the next person?
Yeah, let's go with Morgan.
Hi, I am Morgan Hermanic. I'm with the Community Health Endowment of Lincoln. So we actually are a funder. And the reason why I chose this group is because we obviously work with a lot of grantees who we ask to share data. And we have webinars that we do. We're kind of a different funder in that we really like to work with individuals throughout the entire application process. So we have applicant workshops where we work with people on, how to collect data and share that. It's actually our board of trustees that make the funding decisions, not necessarily staff. And so I would love to kind of learn what we should be sharing with our grantees about data and how they can best share it in a way that makes sense for our trustees who don't necessarily really work in your fields and know that. So understanding it kind of from your side, what I can share to our grantees in that situation about data. And then also, maybe some situations that nonprofits may find difficult for collecting data and how as a funder we may be able to help them with that.
Thank you.
I'll pass it to Angela.
Hi, everyone. I'm Angela Batson. I am a program evaluator at a program called STEPS over at UNO. So we provide program evaluation to mostly nonprofits in the area. And then we have some bigger grants that we do monitoring and evaluation for. So what interested me about this session is a lot more of our nonprofits are coming to us with federally funded grants. And so the data that they're needing to report versus the data that they personally want or that we think is important for them to have are not in alignment. And so just trying to kind of, how do we straddle that line better so that we're still giving, the nonprofit something very useful that they want and they need, but also making sure like we're checking the federal grant box in the end.
Thank you. Yeah, I will say about that one, I love being at a private foundation because it allows you not to have to fit into those boxes. So I think if others on the call, as we're continuing to talk today, if others on the call have found ways around that, would love to hear from others about that as well too. Thank you. Going to pass it to the next person.
How about Teresa?
Hi, I'm Teresa Jellick. I'm the Strategy and Business Intelligence Manager for the Omaha Public Library. And it's a role that has a lot of different pieces, but I do include data analysis. I also manage the state and national grants for the library. So I'm all over the board. I work with our foundation, I work with our board. The person with the question about collecting people wanting data you don't collect, we have a lot of experience in that because we intentionally don't collect any personal data on our patrons. So I might be able to give you some hints on that. And I want to come today because we are in the news a lot lately and we're kind of in that realm of private-public partnerships right now, which is a beast within itself. So.
And you have a big event tonight too, as well, don't you?
I'm sorry?
You have a big event tonight as well.
Yes, we do. Our foundation is having their annual fundraiser tonight, which is sold out, which they're excited about.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. You want to pass it to the next person?
Sure. How about Rose?
Absolutely. My name is Rose Margrave. I work at Immigrant Legal Center, a local nonprofit law firm serving clients in the full state of Nebraska, as well as Southwest Iowa. And I have come today, my title at ILC is Manager of Strategic Analysis. And similar to your role, Teresa, I wear many hats as well. Involves a lot of data analysis, building a foundation for our data within our databases, and then also grant management and grant reporting as well for our agency. And so I'm coming here today for kind of ideas on how best we can communicate with our funders in terms of data and how we can kind of bridge the gap between what we do, the services we offer, and how meaningful it is to us. And then also how we're aligning that with the goals of the grants that we're receiving. And Angela, I'm also super interested in your question as well. We are the recipient of some new federal grants, which can be very demanding. And so I really want to ensure that we position our organization in a great place to anticipate a lot of these data requests as they're also coming in, and as we continue to build the foundation for our data and kind of strengthen it. And with that, I will go ahead and pass it to, I don't see a name listed, but it says STRSUS2. I'll go ahead and pass it over to you.
Hi, I'm Susan Strata, and I am the Director of Corporate and Foundation Relations at Boys Town. And our team primarily works with our affiliate sites across the country to identify and prepare and submit grant proposals. So I work with not only local foundations, but foundations in other parts of the country, sometimes national foundations. And I guess our interest right now is we're starting to work more in rural Nebraska, and I'm struggling to find good data sources to describe those particular areas, because it's an area we haven't really focused on before. And that's what I'm hoping to get out of this. And the other challenge I guess I have is that so many proposals now are online with character limits and word limits, and trying to cite data sources. I'm never sure if, should I use up valuable characters to, with a real long line, or should I just kind of cite something, say this is, we found it from the CDC. So, okay, I will go to Morgan.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Morgan Vogel. I'm a research associate with the Center for Public Affairs Research. So I was pre-assigned to this room, but I'm happy to be here and learn from all of you. And we do a lot with nonprofits and foundations as well in the Omaha community, but also competing for external grants. So I'm sure that there's things that I can learn from all of you. And I will send it to Jared.
Yeah, hey everyone. My name is Jared Stevens. I work for the Nebraska Department of Education in research and evaluation. My current project, we are building an early childhood integrated data system for Nebraska. eKids is what we call it here in Nebraska. And basically, we're working on a long-term sustainability plan for our eKids system right now. And so that's really why I decided to come to this presentation. We're actively meeting with funders and foundations. And so I was just hoping to learn some tips, how to best communicate with funders, maybe the best way to kind of tell our story. And I will pass it to Matt.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Matt Cook. I work at Community Action Partnership of Lancaster and Saunders counties. We have a pretty broad portfolio. We do Head Start, homelessness prevention, food access, financial well-being in Lancaster and Saunders counties. So that's Lincoln and its surrounding areas, and then just kind of north of there in some rural areas. I'm pretty new to my position. I work as the development specialist, and that entails quite a bit of grant writing. So given that I'm, just kind of finding my legs, I thought this would be a great place to go, given that we rely pretty heavily on a few foundations for most of our funding. In particular, working with how funders want to see sources cited. We use a lot of data in our applications, and looking at previous applications that we've submitted, there's not a uniform citation standard. Do you do it parenthetically? Do you just do you link it directly? And that's always been something that, I've sort of gone back and forth with. So if we could get some clarity on that, I'd really appreciate it. But I'm definitely looking forward to the session.
Awesome, thank you.
My last, or is there someone else left to pass it to?
Arlie and Leslie, and then we just had Lindsay join us too.
Well, Arlie, why don't you take it away?
Thanks. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Sorry, I won't be on camera today. We're dealing with sickness in our household, so that's enough. But I'm happy to be here and learn from you all. I am the manager of strategic planning at Children's Hospital and Medical Center here in Omaha. And I'm here as our team is evolving its sort of internal consultant muscle, right? And as we think about planning, healthcare in its transformation is becoming much more data-driven and more focused on outcomes and return on investment, rightly so. And I felt like this breakout was most closely aligned with our efforts to sort of build business cases that answer a need as well as a financial sustainability outcome.
Awesome, thank you. And then I think we have either Lindsay or Leslie.
I can go. This is Leslie. I work for the budget office at UNO, and we get asked to provide a lot of data. So I'm here to kind of listen into the types of data that you folks are looking for to make sure that we've got systems in place to capture that data if we're going to be asked to report on it.
Awesome, thank you. And I know, hi Lindsay, I know you just joined us, but we're just doing quick intros, organization, why you came to this session, and no good others, or this was my last resort is a totally okay response, but then what do you want to get out of it? Just so you sort of understand where everyone is wanting to go with today's discussion.
Perfect. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Decker. Sorry I hopped on late, just got out of a meeting, but I didn't want to miss this. I work at Avenue Scholars as Director of Communications and Development. I'm new in this role. I'm new to the work of development, but not totally new to nonprofit work. And one thing I think that I can get stronger in, I think our organization can get stronger in, is similar to what Leslie said, which is just trying to see a little bit more about what types of information and data can be most helpful to foundations, and then how can we set up some systems within the organization to help to support what information foundation folks need. So I'm just here to learn and be a sponge. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you all for indulging me in this. I love the chance to get to know sort of why folks are here and what they want to get out of it, and hope that we can think about and address some of the questions that you have, and then also create some space and time to talk to each other. At the end, we'll have an opportunity to sort of just hear what are some of your biggest challenges, and you have already started talking about that, whether that is citations or thinking about federal data or disaggregation or thinking about asking for identifying information and including that in grant applications. So if we don't cover that, please bring that question up at the end. And I want to hear from others about what's working for them, because I know there's great wisdom in this room. And so I want to hear from others as well too. But with that, I am just going to share, I have just a couple of slides that I want to share with you all just to provide some overview and some information. Before I begin, I will say, please jump in with questions. If you want to use the chat, feel free, but we're a small enough group, just unmute and interrupt me. I will not take offense to that and would much rather answer questions in the moment if you have them. I will also say that when it comes to funders, there is not a perfect one-size-fits-all answer. So as I'm talking today, I am really talking to you as someone coming from the Weitz Family Foundation. There are a variety of funders, even in Omaha, quite frankly, that have varying interests, varying different grant applications. So I will talk about my experience, and if I can, provide some general insight, but a lot of it is doing your research and understanding who you're talking to. What does that funder care about? Because I will tell you, as someone right now who's reading applications, there was just a grant applicant that we were reading about and reading their application this past week. And it was clear that they had not even gone to our website to look at what we believe in, what our values are, what we do, what we fund. So biggest thing is just doing that research because everyone is going to be a little bit different. And so starting there is always incredibly important. The other thing I would say too is relationship. especially if you're looking at building support here with local foundations, getting to know those foundations and building a relationship. And it may mean that it's not a fit, that your organization isn't necessarily a fit in what that funder typically funds, but at least you can build the relationship and get connected to other foundations as well too. For us, when we're reviewing grant applications, we talk about whether or not we know the organization. And so we want to get the chance to actually know the organization if it is sort of a mission alignment fit for us. So don't rely solely on writing the application as a way to get to know folks in foundations. Again, how that works is going to vary. For us, we usually reserve the fall for grant application reviews, but are always open to meeting and connecting with nonprofits in the spring. So that's sort of our cycle. And you can always just reach out and email one of us on the team, but that's usually our common response in the fall, just because we're trying to get through the 245 grant applications that we received this year. So when we talk about data, we really talk about data, especially with funders. I really see it as an opportunity to talk about both needs. So what are the needs in the community that your organization is trying to address, but also the opportunities. I think if you focus so heavily on needs, it can begin to feel like nothing is solvable or the problem is so overwhelming, but also think about how can you use data to actually talk about opportunities that exist in the community. And when I think about that, and I think about in grant applications, there's a couple of key things. So this really is at the point where you are submitting a grant application. Number one, I would say, is tell a story with the data. Don't let the data be the story. You would be surprised at how many narrative grant applications I read where people are just like, let's just dump all of the data that could possibly impact or interact with the mission of the organization in one paragraph. I love data and I get really, really overwhelmed. And so be really thoughtful about what data points you're actually using and tie it into a narrative portion of your application. Unless you're submitting an application to a group of folks who are going to review who are all data researchers, keep it simple, keep it straightforward, and tie it back to the mission, because a lot of foundations are looking at that mission alignment. And so keeping it clear and not overwhelming and telling a story. So it's thinking very intentionally about how does this data point actually connect to my work? Because you might be able to talk about, if you're serving particular geographic areas and you talk about poverty and you talk about lack of car access and unemployment, and you just talk about all these data points, well, how does that actually tie back to the work that you're actually trying to do and tie back to the opportunity and the need that you all are actually trying to address? So connect it back to your mission is incredibly important as you're thinking about writing a grant application. The other huge thing is language matters. I understand that the census has some limitations as we think about different identities, but be super clear about the language that you're using. I will tell you, I was just reading a grant application that uses almost slang words or words that don't really talk about individuals. So things like, I understand that people want to use things like BIPOC or people of color, I get that. But if you're talking about data, be very clear about who you are talking about. If you are talking about individuals who identify as Black, say that. So be very, very, very clear, because it begins to start to think and feel like coded language a little bit. And so, and for folks, especially like our foundation, where equity is incredibly important to us, it is really hard to see beyond that because we begin to ask more questions. So being very transparent and clear with your language is critical for us as we are looking at grant applications. The other thing about this too is with grant applications, oftentimes there is not good data, and we understand that. It was really interesting. We were talking to a group of nonprofits a while ago, and one organization who was really looking at supporting breastfeeding moms said, you know, there's not great data. The census doesn't provide me information about individuals who are breastfeeding. And the census is a great source, and I have it as a key source, but it doesn't include that type of information. But there is data about individuals who have children under the age of 3. And so looking for that type of data almost as a proxy can help you begin to get at the story. But again, you're not relying on the data to be the whole story. You're wrapping the data into the story that you are trying to tell about the community. I want to pause there before I keep going, just to see if there's any questions, reactions to anything we've talked about so far.
You mentioned proxy data, but I'm also curious about like data that's been collected internally by the organization, and how I mean, if it's available, great, but how does your foundation, how do foundations kind of evaluate I guess the validity or the importance of that kind of information?
Yeah, you know, for us, we're a very sort of relational organization and funder. And so for us, it's really, we're actually looking more about, are you thinking about the data that you're sharing in an equitable way? You know, and so that's different though. Other funders really want to understand the methods, and you can tell by what they value by the questions that they ask. So we have one single question in our application around how do you know, or how do you ensure that your data is not racist? That very clearly shows a value that we have about data and the limitations, quite frankly, of data. If you're applying for an organization that's asking you multiple questions about your evaluation and how you conduct the evaluation, that's a clear indicator that you probably need to get more into methods. So really look at the questions being asked in the application as an expression of the values of that particular funder. And so I would say for us, you know, we love to see impact. If it is something that you do have, but we also understand, especially for smaller organizations, they don't have the infrastructure to help support that. So we're reading grant applications for organizations that have $100,000 budgets all the way up to multi-million-dollar budgets. So we're really seeing the spectrum. So we're not necessarily interested in digging into how you're doing the data, but rather that you're thinking about it equitably. And we'll talk about what that looks like for us and key questions to ask of yourself and your organization in just a minute. But I would say that for us, that is less of an importance. And you can tell that in the application because we don't ask about that. We ask about other things related to equity. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions before we keep going? Okay. So a couple of tips as you're thinking about writing a grant application. Number one is be clear. Don't skirt around who you are serving. The other piece of this too is if you're applying for a grant and the application is asking you to talk about the makeup of your board and staff, be super clear about that. And I think someone asked earlier about uncertainty around sharing that information. I always, quite frankly, will ask the question of who is expressing that uncertainty. Is it folks who have been historically marginalized? Is it people of color? Is it people with disabilities? Or is it like white people? And so those are my responses then to the question would be different depending on who's having hesitation. Because for us, equity is incredibly important, and we want to understand, does your staff and board reflect the makeup of the people that you are serving? And if not, how are you all thinking about addressing that or thinking about how that might create access issues for the people that you are actually working with. So a lot more funders are asking that question more directly, and I think more will. Not everyone does, and not everyone will, but more and more are. And again, that should be an indicator that that is a value of the organization, of that funder. And so be very clear. If you're not there yet, own that and just say that. But it's very clear organizations that try to kind of skirt around the issue a little bit when answering the question. And we're seeing that in our application. And we did actually have an applicant so far. We're about halfway through reviewing our applicants. And then one applicant did say, you know, folks are just really uncomfortable. And this was for staff and board. And so now we're going to go back to the organization and ask the question, well, tell us more about this. Why is this? Because quite frankly, if it is for white people need to get more comfortable about having to disclose that they're white. And so for us, it's a different conversation depending on who's saying that they're uncomfortable about being asked that demographic question. But that's really what we're trying to get at when we ask that question. The other thing is disaggregating data, and the census is so hard with how they think about race and ethnicity. For us as an organization, we really look at it as how you all are collecting the data. We want to meet you sort of where you're at, but do disaggregate when possible. If you are collecting data that allows you to look at different identities, do share that. I think, you know, we see some organizations that will talk about, well, this percentage of BIPOC is who we're serving. And that's fine if that's sort of the limits in what you're collecting, but the more you can disaggregate, the better, because I think it really also shows what you value as an organization and that you're not thinking about people in a monolith, that people have different identities and those greatly vary. And so sharing that when possible, but also understanding that organizations are in different places. The other thing I was talking with the team this morning is when you're talking about your own internal data, is to show progress. We had one organization in an application talk about sort of how many, I think it was the percentage of their folks that they were serving that they were able to meet a goal or be successful, but we weren't able to then compare it. Is that a good number? Is that a bad number? What kind of progress is that? So if you're sharing your own impact, take the time to show that progress or compare it to some sort of benchmark so that we're clear about the growth that has maybe happened in the services that you're offering, or even if going back to that question around identity of board and staff, to show progress in that as well too. So again, being clear is very important when talking about data. The other thing that we talk about a lot is we want organizations to imagine that the people that they're serving will be actually able to read the application. And ask the question, how would they feel? If they were given the application and asked to read it, how would they feel? And so that's really getting at not just data, but how you talk about the individuals that you're serving, how you talk about the services that you provide, that we see a lot. And the way it can often come across is feeling like folks who are being served are either being put down or they're needing to be come and saved, and that sort of savior mentality. And so thinking about that as you're writing applications, especially to organizations like us that think about equity and want organizations to be transparent, and also really think about the strengths of the people that they're serving, not just how you as an organization are helping people. And so imagining that is important as you get to the end of that, because I think it just makes everyone stop and think about what is it that they're saying and what's the message that's coming across. And the other thing is, as you think about sharing all this data about who you're serving, own your own internal journey. As an organization that believes we're all on a journey of understanding and thinking about equity and accessibility, we all have learning to do. And so it's not that you have to have perfect data or a perfect response, but be real about where you're at and the work that you're doing. we ask more questions when organizations seem to come across as if they have it all figured out. Because I'd love to meet someone who has it all figured out, because I don't think any of us do. But I also understand that that's hard, because some funders might want you to have it all together and make it seem like you have it all together. So again, this is where knowing the funder that you're talking to is important. And I know that's hard, because it might mean a different application for maybe the same program to two different funders. And I wish that wasn't the world that it is, but it is. And it's just sort of a reality. So knowing your funders and knowing what they value is also very important. And then also with language, I think about who you're centering when you're talking, and the language that you use. And we'll talk more about that in a minute, but being mindful of that and what that looks like. And I'll give a couple of examples. But before I do that, I just want to pause and just see if there are any questions about that, or any reactions or thoughts.
I'm just really glad that you stated, like, you don't have to have it all figured out, because I think, like, sometimes as I'm starting to kind of work on various narratives for grant applications, I think I'm like, oh shoot, like maybe, we need to work better on in this area or this area. And it's like, certainly, I'm sure, yes, we do. But I'm glad to know that on the foundation side, it sounds like there's some support there, as far as understanding that not everybody has it figured out, and it's just kind of the journey, and just being able to kind of help to really let folks know what journey you're on. So thanks for saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that can be around equity, that can be around data, around your own data collection. Owning that is really important for us. But again, I can't speak for all funders, but for us, just owning where you're at is okay. Matt, I think I saw a hand raise.
Yeah, thank you for that. I wonder if you could talk a little bit too about situations where funders might be approaching these topics a little differently. We had an application about a month and a half ago where the funders, the method that they use to count individuals' data in ethnic and demographic terms did not allow individuals to identify with more than one designation, whereas our metrics did. So our data had a bit of a discrepancy there. And we were able to sort it out with the funder, just exchanged a few emails, got everything going. But in situations where that might not be so easily resolvable, I was wondering if you could share any insight into how that might best be resolved.
Yeah, I think number one is as you're applying for grants, knowing what you're getting into. And so asking the questions about reporting and what's required. Us as a foundation, we actually don't require a report. We just ask that the organization meet with one of our program associates to have an update. So we take a more relational approach to reporting. And so I would say, not being a funder that asks for that, I think what you did proactively is important. I would say most funders want to hear from you if you see an issue or something that might happen. So just being proactive and having that conversation is probably the best first step if you can't really understand what you're walking into in terms of reporting on the other side. Most funders, not all, but most funders will be clear about what's going to be required. But if it's a new funding source or a new grant program, it might be a little bit more difficult. But doing that homework and knowing or talking to other nonprofits or organizations that have gotten funding from the organization, just kind of doing the homework on, okay, I'm going to do this application, but what's going to be required of me on the other side of it, so that sort of going in eyes open, what's going to be expected, and then being proactive if you run into any issues or any sort of discrepancies like that. I would say that may not apply, when you get to the federal level, it's a whole different ball game, if you will, in terms of what reporting actually looks like. The beauty, though, of that is federal grants should be providing very transparent information about what's going to be required. So like I think about even just ARPA dollars that are out there right now. I mean, there's legislation, and you as an organization could dig into the legislation on all of the reporting requirements for things like that. But just knowing what you're getting into and then seeing if there is wiggle room. And honestly, on federal grants, it's if you don't have it, you just don't have it, and you have to put in either non-response or other, but make sure that you are at least attempting to have some of that dialogue with the foundations prior to submitting any reports. So yeah, I can say that hypothetically as someone who doesn't ask for all of that, but that would be my advice, if that's helpful.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So I want to specifically talk about racism and data. One of the things that we see come up in grant applications, and want to really caution folks as you're writing grant applications, is folks will use data to talk about the disproportionate impacts of things like health outcomes, or thinking about housing. And what's really important is that the data is very telling, but what's even more important is the context that you wrap around that data. Because what can happen is you can begin to unintentionally blame individuals for systemic issues. So as I think about what is happening around redlining, if you just stop at this sentence of, we know the disproportionate impact on communities of color around access to home ownership, and then talk about what you're doing on an individual level without naming that a lot of this is because of what has happened with redlining, you begin to set a tone potentially of blaming individuals for having struggles that truly are systemic policy and racism that has been rooted in this country for years. And so be very thoughtful about the context that you use with the data that you're talking about, so that you think about moving from individual blame to thinking about it as more of a systemic issue. You might, as an organization, be working on an individual level, which is fine, but just important to acknowledge the systemic impact that racism and policies have had on individuals that you might be working with. And so that's really important, because then as a reader of grant applications, we can very quickly and easily see that. And without having you in the room and being able to ask the questions to understand your intent, which was probably not to do that, the impact is still there, that we feel like individuals are getting blamed for what really is a systemic issue. The other person is thinking about who gets centered in the data, using terms like non-white is centering folks who identify as white, when the intent probably was to talk about folks who are non-white, but talk about who they are. And so think about that language piece. Also recently read a grant application where the term non-hetero was used. And again, it's centering that community when really you're meant to not center that community or that identity. And so thinking about that language that you're using as you're talking about data, or even just talking in general in your grant application, is really important. And then when it comes to data that you're collecting within an organization, some things to just really think about is who's actually deciding the design of the data collection. Do they share different identities? How is the data being collected? Who is actually analyzing the data? And then who gets access to the results? Are you sharing results of your internal data work with the people that you are working with? Or is it only going to funders? So think about having those conversations internally when it comes to data. And if you are trying to be more intentional about who you're looking at bringing on to help design data collection methods or anything within your organization, or involving people who have been impacted by your programming into that process, tell us about that. We want to know about that. There's some intentionality around that that's important to be talking about and sharing as part of the application as well too. And then if you're only sharing data results with funders or in annual reports, think about how you might actually be able to share results. And again, it focuses that conversation of and thought process, just like with the grant applications, thinking about, I'm going to share this with folks who are receiving the services that I'm offering. How would they feel with how we talk about our impact, or how would they feel about sort of how we share the data? So important thing to think about as you're not only thinking about the application, but also thinking about how you share results. So one of the things that I want to, I want to pause just for a moment, just to see if there are any questions about anything we've talked about so far.
I do have just a quick question about the point about moving away from language that is like non-hetero, non-white, these sorts of things. In cases where, let's say, the grant asks specifically for, like that's the term that they use, would you think it would be appropriate to sort of return the energy they're giving you on that, especially if, for example, something like non-hetero, for example, would include a pretty broad spectrum of identities, and if the funder might have chosen that term for its kind of vagueness and broadness, might it be best to, fight another day on that battle and just use the term there for them?
I think a couple things. One, I think it depends on the funder. I think if you've done that research, you'll know where they're at, if they're open to a conversation. If they're open to a conversation, maybe just ask the why question. Be curious. If you have a chance to engage with them, and federal dollars that's not possible. But if you think about it on a more localized level or private foundation, ask the question and just be curious and say, I'm curious, this is how we talk about our data. I'm curious what you're thinking about that, to understand the rationale behind it. And then as an organization, you might have to make that decision. I tell folks, think about that also as communicating values, quite frankly. And is that a value that is something that you want to be aligned with? And it may not be a big deal if you understand the intent. It could just be that they were trying to keep it simple. If you have a good enough relationship, it could be an opportunity to think about some education potentially. But I understand that that's very hard to do because there is a power differential, because they are the funder and you are seeking out funding. So I understand that may not always be realistic. But if there's an opportunity to just provide a little bit of information or ask questions, a great opportunity. The other piece is you could also say, I was just talking to this other foundation, and here's what they're doing, and getting connected, because sometimes it's easier if one funder talks to another funder about why it is that they're adapting and evolving. That's not always a realistic role for organizations that are applying. I get that too. But if you can approach it from a place of curiosity, that's what I would do. And then if you've made the decision internally that it's still important as an organization, then you might have to adjust.
Cool. That sounds great. Thank you.
Other thoughts or questions? Okay, so I want to share with you a resource that in my time with the Weitz Foundation, I have been exposed to, and I love it. It offers a lot of great information in thinking about data, both in terms of data that you might collect or get from external sources like the census, but also how you think about your own data collection. This is a newer source for me. I'm hoping to do some of their webinars and trainings, so I haven't yet, but they've got a lot of great information on their website. And it really is thinking about data from an equity perspective. And they have a data equity framework and things to think about, all the way from funding to actually communicating and distributing information and results about your organization. And so one of the things that I think is really important, especially from a foundation's perspective, is to really think about the relationship between data and money and power within the project, because all of those are important and all of those bring power. And so being really clear about the power within all of those, whether it is the funding that you're using or the data and how you're going to use it, is just very, very critical. And so thinking about this as a resource, there's lots of different things to consider. And then they actually provide some great training and webinars in how to actually think about and use the data equity framework. That I would just encourage check out on their website. They also, they have some great tools, which I love. It's called Talk to Your Boss Sheets. And to think about equitable data, product distribution, to how to include data in a model, to think about other methodologies, or this idea that randomized controlled trials aren't necessarily always just should be the gold standard of data projects. So just things to think about as you're engaging in evaluation. And it's a resource that we as a foundation are really interested in exploring more of and better understanding what's out there. And then if our grantees are interested, getting them connected to that as well too. But this is really focused, these resources here are focused more so on thinking about how you do data collection and evaluation within your organization. So slightly different than accessing external data to talk about needs or to put together a grant application. This is going to be more resource for your internal data collection. The other thing that I want to also show you, and I know it came up in the last workshop, is folks are asking a lot about thinking about sharing results and data, which is great. Most foundations will allow you to attach annual reports or any other sort of data information. And we actually have a section in our application that says, yeah, like, let us know, the data nerds would love to see anything. So as an organization, if you don't have a graphic designer on staff or somebody solely dedicated to data viz, you can still do things yourself and you can do them in Excel. And I personally love Stephanie Evergreen. I think Josie had mentioned her in the last session. She offers an awesome blog that talks all about different types of data, both quantitative and qualitative data, and how to think about making data viz actually in Excel, which everyone should have access to. And not only does she do that on her blog, she actually gives you steps. And what I love about this is she helps you think about what type of visualization should I actually even think about using. So she has this quantitative chart chooser that I really love. So you can look at on the far left, it's what type of data do you have and what are you trying to communicate? And then she offers different options. This is, free online, but she also does have these really cool cards that you can buy that's like chart chooser. So depending on the type of data you have, you can pull out the cards and they're coded by different colors and say, oh, this is the type of data I'm trying to do. And then it actually comes with instructions and templates that you can just drop your data in to create some of the visualizations. So she's just a great resource. And then on her blog, then you can go in and look at all of the different types of visualizations that you can create yourself. Again, I always suggest to folks, if you have a graphic designer that you can work with, they're a great resource as long as they've been thoughtfully trained in data viz. But if you don't have that and you're trying to do something really quick and simple for like a report, for instance, I always recommend her as a really great resource, because I know some funders will ask for narrative reports that you're trying to put together that maybe you don't necessarily want to be just paragraphs and you want to have some sort of visualization in the report. This is an easy way to be able to do that, because then when you actually click on, and this is just stephanieevergreen.com/how-to, she'll actually show you with visuals and then we'll walk you through all of the different steps. So I just like her because she's just so, I've used her for years. She's just incredibly accessible. And it's like, you don't have to be a graphic designer to do this type of work, and you can make it look visually appealing. There's a lot of thought that has to get put into it. But if you can stick one or two of these graphs in a report that you're providing to a funder really easily, you've definitely stepped up what could be a pretty uninspiring visually report to read, to have it be a lot more interesting. Some funders, this is where doing your homework is important, because some funders will ask you to fill out a very simple form. Obviously, don't waste your time if you can't upload attachments, but I'm seeing more and more funders want folks to be able to upload attachments to allow for more of that creative expression on what and how you all want to share impact. Any questions on those two resources?
Just as a reminder, Emily, you have about 12 minutes left before we get booted out of here.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump back in and just highlight a couple of the really great sources that I use and highly recommend. I do love the census. Their new website over the last couple of years was definitely a shift, but they still provide some really great information. Again, there's drawbacks. I think about like gender specifically, it's pretty limiting. However, it's a good place to start. Then we have great local sources, Voices for Children and their Kids Count Report. I'm biased, but I love the landscape from the Community Foundation. That's where I came from. And then of course, the Center for Public Affairs Research is also a really great, important resource, and encourage folks to reach out to them for data. And then we also do the community health needs assessments through the local hospitals, both at the adult level and the pediatric level. Those are pretty lengthy reports to dig through, but provide really great local information. Because I will say, as a funder, it's really nice to read hyper-local data that is focused. I know that's not possible for everything, but if you can get data that gets down to, instead of talking about what's happening in the United States, you can talk about what's happening in Omaha or what's happening in the zip codes that you're working in. The more specific you can get, I think sometimes the more compelling your story can actually be. So with that, I want to just sort of pause here, because I know there's a lot that folks were talking about earlier as they talked about what they wanted to get out of the session, and want to see if folks are willing to talk about some of those big challenges and then hear from each other. I know we didn't really touch on the federal grant piece, but if there's any sort of things that we haven't touched on that you want to touch on, would love to hear from you. Now you all are going to be quiet.
I have a question, but this might be a little bit of a different question for our audience, so we can wait if anybody has a burning question. But so I'm curious, Emily, you are on the funding side, correct, with the foundation. So how do you just have expertise from looking at other grants for all these years, or how do you all determine what is your criteria for funding and kind of staying up to date on what other foundations include in their applications?
Yeah, so for us, it goes back to our values. And most organizations should be able to speak to sort of what their values are. And that can also translate into what type of impact they want to see. I would say funders are often on a spectrum with where they land in the values to impact. Some folks will be heavier in the values. For the Weitz Family Foundation, we're heavier on the values portion. Other funders are going to be more heavy on the impact. They can say, as a foundation, we want to make this type of impact in the community in this amount of time. So there's definitely a spectrum. And so for us, it's when we review applications, we're really looking for, is the organization really intentionally thinking about equity and accessibility? And our hope is that we clearly communicate that on our website, because we want to be transparent. Transparency is another one of our values. And so we try to have all of that information on the website. I know some funders are not that way. And so it is doing a little digging and asking other folks who have been funded by the organization. You can find that out through GuideStar and 990s. But I think that doing that homework is an important way to understand where they're at. And then also that application, the questions that they ask communicate the values of that organization. So if they're going to be heavier on the financial questions in an application, that's what they care about. They're not as interested in the social impact. They want to know, are you a well-run business and organization? If they're asking more questions on the sort of work that you're doing or the impact that you're having, that's what they care about. So using that as a tool to look at values is important. And then what was the second part of your question?
So I guess, how do you all, if you're funding, how do you all determine like what is important? You said it's important to, you base it on your values. So I'm just wondering, to stay relevant in the pool of foundations and potential funders, where you all like look to, you look to your peers or other foundations to see what they're doing and stay up on what other foundations are asking in their grant applications.
Oh yeah. Locally, I would say we do talk to each other. If you think that the private foundations here in Omaha don't talk to each other, that is not true. We do talk to each other and share information. There's also a lot of great national organizations. The Center for Effective Philanthropy is one that we look to. Also GEO, which is Grant Makers for Effective Organizations. They're another sort of best practice organization that's trying to sort of think about new ways of doing philanthropy. And so those are some of the national ways that we look at, but also, quite frankly, foundations, based off of how they were founded and sort of where they value, is going to change their application greatly. And so I can't ever say there'll be a universal application where there's one application that you fill out for everyone. Like, that just won't happen because of the varying values and focus. But we certainly do share information about what's happening with different organizations and when different needs pop up, for sure.